Lavanya ma'am, shall we start right away? Do we wait for the link to turn active?
Ma'am, 1 minute, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
ஆதி கொஞ்ச நேரப்பா. ஆதி உங்க வாட்ஸ்அப் ஓப்பன்ல இருக்குமா?
Lavanya ma'am, shall we begin?
Yes, ma'am.
Just wait for Lavanya ma'am's go ahead because we are live streaming it.
One minute, ma'am. 1 minute, please.
Yes, ma'am. No problem. So we'll start in a minute.
ஆதி இது கொஞ்சம் பண்ணுப்பா, எனக்கு தெரியலப்பா எங்க எது ஓப்பனா இருக்குன்னே தெரியலப்பா. ஆதி கொஞ்சம் டக்குன்னு வாப்பா ப்ளீஸ்.
ஆதி வந்து ஓபன் பண்ணி கூடண்டா. தெரியாத உனக்கு
தெரியாததுனால தான் கேட்குறோம். எல்லாத்தையும் மினிமைஸ் பண்ணோம்.
இங்க இருக்கும் டெஸ்க்டாப்ல.
அதுலேருந்து எனக்கு கொஞ்சம் அனுப்பிட்டு நான் ஷேர் பண்ணிட்டேன். ஐயோ இது அனுப்பிடுது. இந்த லிங்க் அனுப்பதான் முடியல போகுது சார். சார் அது எங்க அம்மாவா என்ன போட்டுக்க? எப்படி அனுப்புறது?
Lavanya ma'am, start பண்ணிடலாமா? அதுக்கப்புறம் கூட can take off இல்லையா?
Yes ma'am, I will share link. I will share.
Start பண்ணிடலாம் இல்லையா? Okay ma'am. Taiba, you can start. Over to Taiba.
Good evening. Good evening to our honorable teachers, our guest of honor, and all the students. I welcome you all to this two-part lecture series on William Shakespeare. I request Shakespeare Princess Veronica to do the welcome address.
Good evening to all. Warm greetings gathering. On behalf of Bard Women's College, Chennai, I proudly welcome you all for this two-part lecture series, Understanding Shakespeare English, University of Madras, who has put on called been backbone of this program, and I would like to thank to our ma'am for arranging this session. To our graduates and radiance to the session. Once again, I welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavitra. Kindly request our HOD, Dr. S. Chitra ma'am, to introduce the chief.
Good evening to welcome Dr. Ganesh. And it's not the first time that Sir is actually being a resource person to our department. I think it must almost be like a homecoming for you, Sir, because we had been listening to you very often. And in fact, right before the total lockdown in 2020, we had the last program in March, on March 12th, 2020. And it was such an amazing program, and it was so success. It was a great success actually. So we used to recollect those moments, and today we are on this online mode, and I wish if it had been on the offline mode, it would have been really great by your teacher. Dr. Ganesh, his teaching experience spans over 4 decades, and his area of specialization is metadrama in both Oriental and Occidental traditions. And this actually directly relates to the topic that he's going to share got in the field of drama. And whenever we mention drama, I think students of literature, we are always reminded of the immortal Shakespeare. If you look even into Sir's lectures, the variety of lectures he had given, but almost the topics always centered around drama, if you look into the titles of the lectures he had given. And also, again, the memorable publications that he had contributed and acting. And if you look into the topics that Sir had dealt with so far, it bridges both the ancient and the contemporary. One of his publications, I really wanted to mention the title of it. It's about the legendary actor Shivaji Ganeshan on his method acting, because even I'm a diehard fan of Shivaji Ganeshan. So that shows the how Sir can relate with both, say, the ancient as well as the contemporary. And also, it is not only the text that he can relate us with, but also the performance. So that is the greatness of Dr. Ganesh, and he had been such a great teacher, and he has got a great following. Today, I think his lecture will be really wonderful, that all our students will.
Interestingly, they also took interest in 18th century British Romanticism, focusing on one important person called William Blake. Another radical thinker in 18th century, right, British Romanticism, right, focusing but everybody, our education in the English-speaking world, but in many nations as well. But as students of post-colonial literature, don't you see a bit of Macaulay in Bloom? Right? In keeping that Shakespeare, universal Shakespeare intact. Shakespeare will abide, he says. Right? Shakespeare will abide. We do everybody, our education, but in different avatars, world, Shakespeare will abide in nations as well. Now, there is a terrific book called Shakespeare Colonial Theory Literature. Don't you see a bit of Macaulay also wrote a terrific book called Masala Shakespeare, right? In keeping that Shakespeare, universal Shakespeare, all the major theatrical movements of the last century, from formalism and Shakespeare will abide, deconstruction, Freudian, Lacanian psychoanalysis, feminism, queer theory, Marxism, post-structuralism, all these have started seeing themselves in William Shakespeare. Right? Twelfth Night, or What You Will. Right? What a daring title. Right? What a daring title. When Dryden called All for Love, but the world well lost. Let's say it's only an extension of All for Love. But What You Will is a radical departure from specifically saying that the spirit of the Twelfth Night, right, which is the 6th of January, right, or What You Will, right, as you like it, right. So you see a lot of, I am not saying he's a postmodern by any chance, not at all, but his creative genius allowed amazing opportunities for these literary critics, to whichever disposition they belong to, whichever ideological position they belong to see in Shakespeare their own critical position. So new historicism provides us with a terrific insight into the age of Shakespeare, because we cannot believe in history. Right? In my time, let's say we were made to say take only G.M. Trevelyan as the authentic account of English history. But we studied social history separately. Right? During my time, let's say social history of England was a separate paper. Social history of England and history of literature. But we never brought about an interface between these two. New historicism brought about this interface. Right? New historicism brought about this interface. So keeping that in mind, let us say we will move on to the individual plays. Right? And I will begin with Richard II. And we just remember that universal element. Remember that political element, ideological, say, positions, ideologies in conflict. Right? Ideologies in conflict. Ben Jonson created ideograms. He created caricatures. Whereas Shakespeare created real people, but the real people obviously represent ideology. That's why we call the characters of William Shakespeare as individualized types. Right. Now, for history plays, the sources were two, English history plays, I mean. One is the book by Raphael Holinshed called The Chronicles of England, Ireland, and Scotland, and Edward Hall's The Noble and Illustrious Families of York and Lancaster. Right? Two major books. He wrote two tetralogies, right? Four play unit. A tetralogy comprises 4 plays. 2 tetralogies and 2 individual plays. And in total, he wrote about 10 English history plays, excluding Henry VIII. Excluding Henry VIII, which was written in collaboration. King John and Henry VIII obviously will belong to the last 2, but 8 plays, very interesting. Henry VI, parts 1, 2, and 3. Richard III is the first tetralogy. Richard II, Henry IV, parts 1 and 2, and Henry V, the second tetralogy. Right? As we mentioned, we see that Shakespeare actually dealt with the latter part of English history first and the early part of English history later. Right? So this is the most important thing. With the death of Henry V in 1422, the conflict between the families of York and Lancaster till the death of Richard III, Right? You have the first tetralogy. Then you go back, let's say, to the dramatized history of Richard II and how he was forced to abdicate his throne. Then the Tudor dynasty being established with the accession of Henry VII later after Henry VI. But here we have Richard II, Henry IV, Bolingbrook or Bollingbrook as he is called in certain texts. And obviously Prince Hal, who transforms himself into King Henry V. So this is the way in which he wrote. Now, don't forget that this play was written modeling himself after Christopher Marlowe's Edward II. Right? Edward II came in 1592. Richard II was written in 1597. Right? Now, we have already mentioned Marlowe and Shakespeare. Throughout, we will be mentioning him or them. Is it a tragedy or is it history? Right? The debate will be on and on and on. If it is a tragedy, then it is a response to Marlowe. Right? Tribute to Marlowe, if you want to look at it positively. Right? Or it's a great freedom from Marlowe. Right? For that, we need to go to sonnets 85 and 86. My tongue-tied muse in manners holds her still, while comments of your praise richly compiled. In sonnet 85, my tongue-tied muse in manners holds her still. I am amazed, I stand aghast. Marlowe, your reputation is so much and your genius is such that I can only wonder at you. Right? Breathless with adoration, as Wordsworth would call with regard to nature. Now, in sonnet 86, was it the proud sail? And so, in between, Marlowe must have been killed in a tavern brawl. Right? Was it the proud sail of his great verse, bound for the price of all too precious you? That's how he writes, let's say. And you know, was it the proud sail is an echo from Was This the Face in Dr. Faustus. Right? That is associated with Was This the Face that every day under the household roof did keep 10,000 men. So in one sense, Richard II, if you consider this to be a tragedy, you can say that this is creative emancipation, creative freedom. Right? Not that he is happy that Marlowe is dead, because we do believe with the legend in the legends that told us that he had terrific regard for Marlowe. And if you have seen that film, says Shakespeare in Love, there is a scene in a tavern where Shakespeare sits with a lot of admiration for the posture. The physical posture shows that he respects Marlowe very much. But there is what is called what we will adapt that expression, the anxiety of influence, in a very different way, not in the Bloomian sense. The anxiety of influence of Marlowe. Right? So if it were a tragedy, then Richard II is modeled after Edward II, in which, let's say, the personal became more important than the political. Right? From public duty to personal desire. That is the problem in Edward II. His homosexual relationship with Gaveston. Right? Marlowe never spoke about history at all. Right? We get to know that Edward III was the king later, but we are not bothered about political intrigues. Nothing in Edward II. Sheer poetry. Right? Sheer poetry. What are kings when regiments gone, but perfect shadows of a sunshine day? It looks like a line from Richard II. Right? What are kings when regiments gone, but perfect shadows of a sunshine day? Right? This is echoed everywhere in Shakespeare, in plays, history plays particularly. Now, if you consider it to be a history play, then we need to look at the second tetralogy, that Shakespeare, with a lot of intelligence, introduces the character of Hal in Richard II towards the last part of the play, where you see he sees, let's say, Hotspur bringing a lot of laurels to the country, and Prince Hal is always not there in the court. He is there in the Tavern World. So just by introducing Prince Hal, he provides us with a hook to the other history plays, the other three plays. Richard II, Henry IV, parts 1 and 2, and Henry V. Now, people like Dover Wilson and E.M.W. Tilliard and others thought that Shakespeare chose the first part of, let's say, English history later only because he wanted to evolve his concept of ideal kingship. Right? Actually, history plays were written because Spain had been defeated. The Spanish Armada was a great impetus for many playwrights to deal with English history. English audiences wanted to see their kings and queens. And theaters were too many. So you just, let's say, churn out plays based on history. So writing history was part of your patriotic agenda, your political and patriotic agenda. Henry VIII, obviously, to please the Queen and the royalty. So in that context, if it were a history play, and if you believe that we are going to deal with an ideal king, for Shakespeare, ideal king is Prince Hal, who will transform himself, redeem himself, as used by Hal himself in Henry IV, part 1, in that famous soliloquy, I know you all, and will a while uphold this unyoked humor of idleness. I will redeem time, he says. Like a bright metal on a sullen ground, my past will be the sullen ground, and my future will be the bright metal. So in order to develop this idea of an ideal king, he wrote the second tetralogy, and the stark contrast to that ideal king will be Richard II. Right? Richard II. King Henry V is all that Richard II is not. And Richard II is all that Henry V is not. So they became bipolar opposites. And King John also. And King John also. And he dare not say anything terrible about Henry VIII. John of Gaunt is a very important figure in Richard II. He called him the landlord of England. You are the landlord of England, he says. Landlord of England art thou, not king. So who are the people who contest Richard II in the play? Unfortunately, John of Gaunt, who is powerless. Duke of York, his uncle, who is powerless. The gardener, obviously, who provides us with an alternative discourse, again, very powerless. I don't think he can really interfere with the affairs of the state. So Richard II is a poet, right? Sheer poetry. Now, you obviously cannot see him as a tragic hero. Dr. Johnson had already commented on that. Right? He is an inadequate human being, so he will be an inadequate tragic hero. Because a tragic hero is supposed to go through the process of illumination through Niscians, like in a Bildungsroman novel. Right? You must have Amarcia, a tragic flaw, and King Richard has a lot of flaws, not one. Right? And there is reversal, yes, there is a reversal of fortune called peripetia in Aristotle. Right? Amarcia is tragic flaw. Peripetia is a sudden reversal of events. And the third one is most important, anagnorisis, a single moment of illumination. A single moment of illumination. Now, this man has no moment of illumination throughout the play. Amarcia, yes. Peripetia, yes. When Bollingbrook comes and then takes away not only his property, but also the crown. But where is this realization? He doesn't even realize, like Edward II, what are kings and regiments gone, but perfect shadows of a sunshine day. He never soliloquizes like Macbeth, who said, life is but a walking shadow, say full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Right? A poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage. Richard II is like that. A poor player, a very bad actor. So in that context, let's say the idea of tragic hero doesn't happen in the context of Richard II. Right? And most interestingly, now we'll speak about the politics in the play. The relinquishing of his crown, which happens in Act 4, Scene 1, was omitted from all the subsequent productions until 1608. Shakespeare had already retired to Stratford. Right? Now we will speak about the instance of political censorship. What are the important scenes in Richard II? One is the duel between Thomas Mobre and Bollingbrook, or Bollingbrook as he is called. Because Bollingbrook has accused Thomas Mobre of having killed his uncle, the Duke of Gloucester. The Duchess of Gloucester want action to be taken against somebody. Richard II is completely inactive. Right? One accuses the other. Then he arranges for a duel, a personal duel. Right? The most ineffective mode to settle a political quarrel. And then he banishes Bollingbrook for 10 years, and then he reduces it to 6 years, and Thomas Mobre is banished for life. Because it is believed that Richard II had been involved in the killing of the Duke of Gloucester. Right? This is a story. That is one instance. Second one, when he returns from Ireland, that bucket scene, when Bollingbrook is on the ascendant, right, when he goes down, that he is weighty, powerful. Right? That is another important scene that we need to focus on in Richard II. And the most moving scene is the mirror scene, as it is called. He wants to have a look at his face in a mirror to see that royal image. And Henry IV calls him Richard. He's so used to be called my liege, my king. He's not used to be called, definitely not used to be called, say Richard at all by anybody. His cousin calls him in the court because he had become a king by the time. He is not able to bear that. So he indulges in what is called a conscious dramatization of his grief that accounts for his poetry. That accounts for his poetry. The poetry in Richard II very clearly shows that he has lost touch with reality. He's lost touch with reality. Whereas in all the tragic heroes, the poetry is associated with awareness. Whether it's Macbeth's poetry, Lear's poetry, Othello's poetry, or Hamlet's poetry. Right? It doesn't lead anywhere. Right? Bloom made a terrific remark in this context. He said, when his kingship diminishes, his poetry improves. When his kingship diminishes, his poetry improves, he said. Now we'll quickly see the performance history. Right? It ran into censorship during Restoration, 1660. It was little performed throughout 18th century. No performance of Richard II. Right? Don't forget the kings and queens are ruling at that time. It was in 1815, Edmund Kean, for the first time, transformed that history play into a tragedy through performance. Though Shakespeare had called it a tragedy, he never put that as a part of his history plays at all. History plays was a name given by us or the critics later. Right? It was done when the folios and quartos were created. In the Stationer's Register, which records the publication of plays, it was always said the tragedy of King Richard II. Right? So Edmund Kean presented Richard II as a tragic hero, completely keeping away the political problems in the play. And 20th century, earlier part of 20th century, studied psychology, focused only on the psychology of the individual hero. And obviously, later part of the latter part of 20th century and the 21st century, the political issues get foregrounded. Right? The political issues get foregrounded. Right? Today, we read Richard II for power, authority, legitimacy. And most importantly, we should understand that this dealt with a very important debate called right? Whether the idea of honor, the idea of virtue came by birth or came by character. It was a Renaissance debate. So if a bad king is there, let's say he has to be removed, can he be removed? That debate was going on. And very interestingly, if you look for some intertextual resonances, Shakespeare always thought about this idea of abdication. You see that in King Lear, which is done willingly. It is out of his own volition that he gives up his crown, which is the most terrible mistake that he commits. Right? And the idea of coup against a king, you see it in Julius Caesar. Many plays are connected in that particular context. Now, coming back to this idea, Bollingbrook and Richard II, right? Is he a power-hungry man, Bollingbrook? Or is he a patriot like his father, but powerless patriot? Gods is the quarrel, John of Gun says in the play. Right? There is a terrific scene in the play, Richard II, when Bollingbrook was actually come to get back his lands, get back his property. And Duke of York tells him that you dare not go against a God-appointed king, a God-anointed king. Right? That scene, very interestingly, must be seen as a dialectical interchange of two ideological positions, one medieval, the other modern. Bollingbrook representing the modern, Renaissance, and Duke of York representing the medieval point of view. Right? He just wants restitution of his property. That's how he comes in. And there is no major conflict in Richard II. No big battle. Right? The crown is just taken away. But there is a series of small incidents. How he removes bushy, bagot, and green, the caterpillars of the Commonwealth. Beautiful expression Shakespeare uses. And how they are removed and how slowly Richard II loses his authority and power. So Richard is weak, selfish, right? Given to more of rhetoric and self-pity than action. Now the immediate cross-reference will be Hamlet, who thinks a lot, does not do much, but Hamlet is definitely not Richard II. For him, thought is action. Right? For Hamlet, thought is action. Right? Say, you have a statement about John Donne, right, made by T.S. Eliot. A thought to Donne was an experience, it modified his sensibility. A thought to Donne was an experience, it modified his sensibility. That is Hamlet. King Richard II, say, believes in this divine right theory of kingship. But there was a homily, I'm talking about ideological position. A rebel is worse than a worst prince, and rebellion worse than the worst government or the worst prince that hitherto hath been. Now, this homily, created by the authorities, the powerful people, right? A rebel is worse than a worst prince, and a rebellion is worse than the worst government of the worst king. This homily was constantly read in the churches. In every single congregation, this homily was read to instill that sense of false patriotism, that you dare not go against a God-appointed king. Richard II's tragic flaw, Amartya, is excessive belief in this theory, not realizing that he can be touched. Right? He can be touched, he can be disturbed. Right? So this is the idea. And there are no alternative voices. Richard II does not have a person like Falstaff to puncture the illusions that he suffers from. His illusions only gets bloated up again and again and again. So if Bollingbrook is an usurper, this man is a self-destroyer. Right? He destroys himself. Right? So though Bloom says one can never establish Shakespeare in any particular stance, whether political, religious, or philosophical, which is very clearly anti-new historicism, we today see that in Richard II, a popular history combines the familial, the national, and the political strides that happened. Right? Everything comes in together at this particular point. And then we'll speak about this most important thing with regard to, say, the play, right? Which is the anecdote. New historical anecdote. An anecdote is a text in itself which can tease out warring forces of signification from a literary text. And what is that anecdote? In the year 1601, one William Lombard, who was an archaeologist, a man who was interested in the past, who had done a lot of work in the study of the past, he interviewed Queen Elizabeth. Right? He interviewed Queen Elizabeth, and she said to him, I am Richard II, know you not. Know you that, actually. I am Richard II, know you that. Which means very clearly, Germaine Greer also, she also speaks about this. Right? So an anecdote is capable of forcing political subtexts to come to the fore. An anecdote in itself is a mini history. Right? It's mini historical account. What you call petite narratives. Grand narrative and petite narrative. Right? Mini narratives. Grand narrative is singular. Petite narratives always plural. Multiple versions, multiple ways of looking at things. Now, why was that said? The Earl of Essex, right, who rebelled against the Queen, who very interestingly, like Richard II went to Ireland and could not win that he could not put down that rebellion, comes back to England, shamefaced actually, and the legend has it that she actually slapped him across his face. But there was a love-hate relationship between the Earl of Essex and Queen Elizabeth. Now, this man thought that Richard II could incite violence, incite a change of mind in the people, and it will aid the cause of his rebellion, that he sponsored the play. Right? He sponsored Richard II, subsidized, and his close friend was Earl of Southampton, who is the young man friend in the sonnets. The young man friend or Earl of Southampton was Shakespeare's patron. So Shakespeare had no choice but to perform Richard II, Shakespeare's Richard II, because there are other versions. And it was a runaway success. It was performed in inns of court. It was performed in inns, taverns. People went, and that was obviously forming public opinion. And with her power, very interestingly, she could have stopped the play. She could have arrested Shakespeare. She did nothing of that sort. She just allowed the play to go on. Right? She just allowed the play to go on. And most interestingly, she commissioned this play for her own private, viewership with her own royal members of the family. She watched Richard II. Other things she heard from people, how they were responding. And the brutal fact of history is, after she watched that performance, she killed Earl of Essex. Right? He was killed for treason. Right? He was beheaded for treason. Right? Imagine Shakespeare's position, right? The tension that he should have had. Right? Now, speaking about voices in history, John of Gaunt was a real man, but he was actually a thief. When you go back to history, he was an ordinary chief, a thief, let's say baron thief. But he is elevated to a very old, mature, doddering old man. Duke of York, who represents a medieval viewpoint, but he collapses and he actually defects to Bollingbrook's side. The gardener is Shakespeare's own invention. The queen was not even in her teens, but she is shown as a very mature woman in the play. The gardener's political commentary, like a choric commentator, like Enobarbus in, say, Antony and Cleopatra, he says, England is a beautiful garden, but Richard II is the worst gardener that we have ever had. You are the landlord of England. Go back to John of Gaunt's statement. The mirror scene is very interesting scene that way. He breaks the mirror and he sees multiple images of, say, the crestfallen Richard II. He luxuriates in grief, actually. Right? He luxuriates in grief. And obviously, he can never ever be a man of action. Right? He can never ever be a man of action. Now we move to the next play connected with Richard II. Henry IV, Part 1. He tampers with history to the maximum in this play. Hotspur, whom you see in Richard II, Northumberland's son, the nephew of Worcester. Hotspur was, say, elder to Bollingbrook. But in this play, Hal and Hotspur are of the same age. So that you can, say, pit one against the other. Make it a study in contrast. Right? Make it a study in contrast. Right? So this is the idea. This play was also performed. Right? Stationer's Register, it is recorded in 1598. But it's believed that in 1597, like Richard II, this was also, say, produced. And we know, traditionally speaking, that Shakespeare never wrote a full-length script and then started producing. In Shakespeare in Love, you see that. When Act 1, Scene 1 is going on, he writes Act 1, Scene 2. But he selects materials from history. He restructures history. He changes history for his own dramatic interest. Gardner is fine, let's say. Henry V, you have a soldier called William who questions the king. Powerless voices. Powerless voices. But a voice, definitely. Now, the play has been a theatrical success, and it has been a literary success. The very fact that in 2022 you are doing Henry IV as part of your syllabus shows its literary success. Right? So what does he do? Very interestingly, he created the most amazing character called Sir John Falstaff, or Sir Oldcastle, as his name, Sir John Oldcastle, as the name is given him. Right? Again, we look for the politics of nomenclature here before I quickly come to the story of the play. Right? You know, he was being created as a symbol of vice, the lord of misrule. Right? All that you say negatively about Falstaff. But Falstaff is the sanest voice in in Henry IV Part 1. He is rejected in Henry IV Part 2. He dies in Henry V. The Queen could not tolerate the death of this genius of a man, that she wanted Shakespeare to revive him. Merry Wives of Windsor was written only because there was popular demand for Falstaff. You have a similar history with regard to Sherlock Holmes. Right? He's declared dead, but lot of protest that Arthur Conan Doyle had to revive him, let's say, to keep him alive for another brief period. Yeah. So in that context, this Sir John Oldcastle given to Falstaff was actually a 15th century Lollard who was burnt at stake as a heretic. But later on, almost a century later, that is 16th century, that is during Shakespeare's time, he was a celebrated Protestant martyr. Right? He was a celebrated Protestant martyr. And very interestingly, William Brooke was Queen Elizabeth's, say, Lord Chamberlain, traced his lineage through the wife of this Sir John Oldcastle, and he was so upset that this name was created there. He thought that it was an irreverent treatment of a very important historical figure. He was much offended, and she was obviously very close to the Queen, that Sir John Oldcastle became Sir John Falstaff. Right? Again, another instance of how art was controlled, like it is today. With all our happy talking about democracy, artists say either they should write incognito or they should go outside into exile. It has happened. Throughout the world, it has happened. In all totalitarian states, let's say, the authors have either become incognito or they have gone, let's say, they have exiled themselves to write. Right? Now we'll come to the play quickly. You have two distinct worlds, Tavern World and the Court World. In the Tavern World, the king is Sir John Falstaff. In the Court World, it's Henry IV, the practical, say Machiavellian, manipulative, strategic king, Henry IV. Right? So you have a terrific contrast. And Hal, obviously, is caught between these two father figures. One is real father, biological father. The other is a father figure. So he is caught between the lively, dynamic, radical imagination of Falstaff and the practical, strategic king, Henry IV. And he has to choose between these two people. Right? He has to choose between these two people. Shakespeare's genius lies in bringing a non-historical character. By non-historical, I mean Sir John Oldcastle had nothing to do with Henry IV. Sir John Falstaff is the invention of Shakespeare. Is the greatest invention of Shakespeare. Right? My guru, Dr. Vishnumat, late Dr. Vishnumat used to say that Falstaff is the closest to come to the Indian Vidushaka. Right? And what does an Indian Vidushaka do? He is powerless, no doubt about it. He can't change anything in any play. If there is the play has love interest, he will debunk love. If a play has war interest, he will debunk war. So Falstaff is an irrepressible knight, but very important because he can always offer us with vital, alternative modes of thinking. Right? The sober world of politics, the ugly world of politics, Falstaff will be there to constantly puncture the illusion. I have already mentioned the soliloquy. I know you all. I will redeem time, he says. Then you have a terrific play within a play where Falstaff acts as king and Falstaff acts as Hal. And Hal acts as Henry IV and Hal acts as Hal. Right? See the genius of Shakespeare. Amazing play within a play. The greatest instance of metadrama in which a lot of political games are being played. It is actually the play between Falstaff and Hal. Falstaff wants to know whether he will be rejected when Hal becomes king. Hal, in no uncertain terms, when the play comes to an end, the play within the play comes to an end, tells Falstaff that he will be rejected, and he does reject him in Henry IV Part 2. Right? He does reject him in Henry IV Part 2. So that scene is very important, the play within the play. Right? And the play very beautifully connects, as I told you, that link is suggested. So shaken as we are, so worn with care. That's how Henry IV begins. Civil butchery. Like an ill-sheathed knife, it cuts its own master. Images. Amazing images of civil war. And the figure of Hal has to move from Eastcheap, where he keeps company with the comic genius Falstaff, Points, Ned, the hostess, Bardolph, all these people. Right? The ruffians, the riffraff of English society. He keeps company with them. But they use that, let's say, these traditional critics have used that as a terrific knowledge that he acquires of the commonest people, that when he becomes king, he knows the entire English society. That is the interpretation. But today we see Hal as a Machiavellian prince. Right? And then the war, the civil war itself, you have, say, Falstaff debunking the idea of honor. Right? You have three people in the play talking about honor. I'll just read one part of it. Can honor set to a leg? no, or an arm, no, or take away the grief of a wound, no. Honor hath no skill in surgery. What is honor? A word. Right? Almost a Hamletian reaction. Honor is a mere word, and so are many words used in politics. Words, words, words. Right? And then he says, what's the point? There is no point believing in this concept of honor. Honor is a mere scutcheon. And so ends my catechism. He uses a religious word. Now, he is a genius to provide you with alternative visions. Right? He's a genius to provide you with, say, alternative visions. But he will be silenced. He has to be silenced if the play were to go on. If the political world has to go on, Falstaff needs to be there, but he has to be liquidated. So in Henry IV, Part 2, Act 5, Scene 5, right, lines 45 to 49, he says, I know thee not, old man. He rejects Falstaff. I know thee not, old man. Fall to thy prayers. How ill white hairs become a fool and jester. I have long dreamt of such a kind of man. I surfeited, swell, so old, soul profane. I despise my dream. He says, my staying with Falstaff is a kind of a nightmare. And I wish to forget that nightmare. Right? I wish to forget that nightmare. So there is a three-pronged attack to the concept of human honor. One is Falstaff, which I read through quickly. Hal, very pragmatic, very realistic. And Hotspur, very romantic. He idealizes the concept of honor. He says, I will pluck honor from the pale-faced moon. I will pluck honor from the deepest deep of the sea. But what makes Henry IV very important is Falstaff. He debunks war. He makes fun of war. He drops down dead on the battlefield, holds his breath, a huge man, holding his breath, the most difficult thing. He would rather die than do that. He holds his breath. He wants to live, and he carries sack to the battlefield, not weapons. He anticipates. Bluntschli in Arms and the Man. Bluntschli is nothing but a pale reflection of Falstaff, who is anti-war. You know, it's anti-love and anti-war, Arms and the Man. Right? So in that particular context, you see that Hal creates the political world, and slowly and steadily he transforms. But when you look at the history of Henry V, he is a very dissolute man. And it is believed, the legend has it, that he met a very spiritual man one day after the death of his father. And he felt very guilty that he kept away from him. He was always in the tavern. He was always in the tavern. So, out of terrible guilt, repentance, he attains redemption. Politically, at least. You have a lovely line in Henry V. Consideration like an angel came and whipped the offending Adam out of him. So, in one sense, say Prince Hal Henry V is described as a pre-lapsarian Adam. Not after the fall Adam, but before the fall Adam. Pre-lapsarian. Consideration like an angel came. Consideration is a spiritual quality. Milton uses that in his Honest Blindness. When I consider how my light is spent. That word consider is deep reflection. So in that context, Sir John Falstaff, very interestingly, Harold Bloom calls him comic Socrates. Right? You don't see much humor in Socrates. Comic Socrates. And he makes a very pertinent remark. Falstaff instructs us in freedom. Bloom says, Falstaff instructs us in freedom, not in society, but from society. So in one sense, he is a comic debunker of all that is terrible in society. You need a voice like him. In Indian context, as I told you, the predominant rasa will be laughed at. Right? The Vidushaka in Abhignana Shakuntalam will laugh at love. His job is to debunk. Now that introduces us to a very important word called carnivalisque. The carnivalisque is the radical voice that you listen to in many plays. It can be the gardener, it can be Falstaff, it can be Williams in Henry V, right? It can be Sir Toby Belch in Twelfth Night. Just because the what virtuous, should there be no more cakes and ale? So in that particular context, Falstaff provides us with the freedom from the clutches of society, the conditioning of society, right? The conditioning of society. And Falstaff knows very interestingly that history itself is in a state of flux and a lot of reversals, right? Lot of reversals. And going back to Marlowe and Shakespeare, the contest between Marlowe and Shakespeare, through the character of Falstaff, Shakespeare has proved his genius. Marlowe could not have created a character like Falstaff. Right? He could not have created a character like Falstaff. So in that particular situation, in that particular condition. Now going back to the important scenes, the scenes in the tavern are extremely important. The play within the play is extremely important. So the play within the play is not about preparing Hal to meet his father, Henry IV. When he goes to the court, he has to answer, right? To adapt a line from, say, Milton, lest he returning chide, what will you do? So they play act. Right? They play act, which is beautifully adapted in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead by Tom Stoppard. One plays Hamlet, one plays Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They question Hamlet before they meet Hamlet, which they don't do in the play, Hamlet itself. The play within the play is a terrific means by which you puncture the illusions that the outer play has created, political illusions that the outer play has created. Falstaff enlists people in the army, very weak people. They can't even take a sword, they will fall on the other side, but he will make a fast buck. Falstaff exposes the commerce of war, the commercial aspects of war. Later on taken up by All My Sons, later on taken up by Mother Courage and Her Children by Brecht. Right? All these plays, they spring from Shakespeare's, say, creative fountain. He's a fountainhead, as it were. Right? You see, All My Sons, the commerce of war is discussed. Mother Courage, the commerce of war is discussed. Falstaff begins all that. He makes a fast buck. They will be peppered, he says. I have enlisted people who will be peppered on the battlefield. Right? Will be peppered on the battlefield. So this is the most important thing that you see in the context of, say, the play Henry IV. So you see them as a relationship. Right? Hal is there in Richard II. Hal is there in Henry IV Part 1. Hal is there in Henry IV Part 2. He is King Henry V in Henry V, the ideal king of England. But when you read Hal through Falstaff, you will debunk that kingship. You look at him very differently. And if you're interested, please read a poem by Herman Melville on Falstaff and Henry V. Right? I don't have time, let's say, to go through this. Right? The title of the poem is Falstaff's Lament over Prince Hal become Henry V. Right? Falstaff's Lament over Prince Hal become Henry V. Right? You should read that poem because it provides you with an alternative vision. Right? It provides you with an alternative vision. Dr. Chitra, can I go on for a while and then try to do at least one more play?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll maybe take up, quickly deal with Twelfth Night and then very briefly speak about Antony and Cleopatra. Sonnets, I don't think I will be able to now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, we take Twelfth Night very interestingly, and then I'll deal with symbolic geography in Antony and Cleopatra. About 10-15 minutes, I should wind up. Twelfth Night, or What You Will. 1601, very important year for Shakespeare, because Hamlet comes in 1601. 1596, his son Hamnet dies. His twin sons, Judith, Susanna, and Hamlet. One of the twins, dies, and it's believed that Shakespeare could not manage that grief. Right? So 1601, you can write two plays which can be considered to be binaries. One is Twelfth Night, or What You Will, and Hamlet, same year, 1601. And we believe that he did write Ur Hamlet also. Right? It is a romantic comedy, right? Using a lot of tricks and mistaken identities, which Shakespeare has always been interested in from Italy, from Plautus and Terence. He had always been interested in this. Comedy of errors, he had already talked about twins causing confusion. In Two Gentlemen of Verona, cross-dressing is so important in Shakespeare. Boys coming as girls, girls coming as boys. Right? Girls coming as boys, as was also a theatrical necessity because they could not act. Girls could not act. Women could not act during Queen Elizabeth's time. So they used to choose boys who had not arrived at manhood and dress them up as women. Cross-dressing is a theatrical necessity, but cross-dressing today is Shakespeare's incisive insight into gender identities. Right? Gender identities. In comedies, you have that famous line by Ruskin, there are no heroes in comedies. And there are no heroines in tragedies. But why are there no heroes in comedies? Because the women are extremely powerful, vital, vivacious people. Orlando pales into insignificance before Rosalind. Bassanio pales into insignificance before Portia. Ferdinand pales into insignificance before, Ferdinand. Ferdinand pales into insignificance before Miranda. Right? So is Perdita. Florizel is nothing before her. Amazing women that he has created. Now, through these powerful women, Shakespeare has obviously asked us to question constructs of gender identity. Right? This is the only play which has a lot of darker elements. Viola is the only comic heroine to have a lot of sadness in her. She sat like Patience on a monument. She has that Hamletian streak in her because this play was contemporaneous with Hamlet. Right? Plautus's Menachmi, that is the name of the play. It was an Italian intrigue play that influenced him. Right? And Twelfth Night, Samuel Pepys in his diary in 1663 said, it was not at all relating to the, title, the name of the day. Twelfth Night has nothing to do with this play. Now, I mentioned Carnival. I'll mention once again. The Carnivalisque is a terrific political topsy-turvying of hierarchical structures so that you may question them, disturb them, interrupt them, intervene with them, change them if that is possible. Right? Change them if that were possible in the past. That is possible in the present. The carnival spirit is a reaction or reactionary spirit, a radical departure from established notions of anything for that matter, be it in the domestic sphere or in the political cultural sphere. Right? Some critics believe maybe it was first performed on 6th of Jan 1601, so he called it Twelfth Night. But don't forget, this is a most apt title, Twelfth Night, because when you look at the early modern festive culture, which Mikhail Bakhtin later on takes on to analyze his idea of carnivalesque. What happens in a carnival? There is a sanctioned transgression of boundaries, male and female identities, high and low identities. Right? High and low identities. Your social roles are topsy-turvied. Right? Your social roles are topsy-turvied. Particularly master-servant relationship is upturned, upended or upturned. Right? In that sense, Twelfth Night retains its carnival spirit. Now, if Falstaff is the comic genius of Henry IV, Part 1, the play that's prescribed for us, Sir Toby Belch is the comic genius, right? He is the Lord of Misrule here. If Falstaff is the Lord of Misrule there, say Sir Toby Belch is the Lord of Misrule here, right? And he's also the master of festivities, right? He enjoys himself, right? He enjoys himself. He can only drink and be merry, right? The Epicurean lifestyle, as it were. Now, his overindulgence, the quarrel with Malvolio, which is most important in the play, is seen as a symbolic, say, emblematic and symbolic quarrel between the spirit of the carnival and Lent season in Christianity. Right? Lent season is known for fasting, abstinence, penitence. Right? That is to commemorate, say, the Lord himself in the wilderness when he maintained or he practiced this abstinence, fasting. Now, this man is the spirit of the carnival. And we all know the conflict between Puritan corporation and theatre. And I've always said to my students that the Queen controlled both. Right? If you have seen in Shakespeare in Love, it's very clear that a royal woman has acted in the play of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. But the Queen alone can have that audacity, that royal power to look at a woman and say, this is a man. And the Puritan corporation keep quiet. Otherwise, they could have arrested. They arrest Ben Jonson for comedy of humors. So she held the Puritan corporation, which is pitted against theatre. And she needs theatre for her royal sustenance. Right? So Malvolio is a figure of Puritanism in the play. And is also a symbol of Lent, as opposed to the carnival in Toby Belch, or represented by Toby Belch. And the carnival spirit is retained. Maria has a secret marriage with Sir Toby Belch, which again for me anticipates brilliantly what Shaw will do in again Arms on the Man when Lauca gets married, or at least she wishes to get married to Sergius. She always wants to break the hierarchical structure. She doesn't want to be a maid at home at all. She wants to improve her social position, like Malvolio wants to be a count. Right? Like Malvolio wants to be a count. And I've always seen a beautiful parallel between Sir Toby Belch and Andrew Aguichic in this play, and Iago and Roderigo in Othello. Same story. See the genius of Shakespeare. One is terrible tragedy. Roderigo's death is so terrible. Andrew Aguichic being fooled is a source of humor. And we should understand that humor, any kind of humor, is exploited. Right? You make fun of somebody, it is definitely a means of exploitation, some way or the other. Malice free, malice full of malice, that is a distinction you may make. Right? Say, gulling Malvolio is malice free for Feste, but full of malice for, say, for Malvolio. He says, I will torment you for what you have done to me later. So, this idea of Twelfth Night celebrating the spirit of comedy, the spirit of carnival, is what you see through the characters of Belch, Toby Belch, and say Malvolio. And Malvolio, very good, again, the point that you can make is, when you have read Measure for Measure, you have Angelo, again, the same man who has that Puritan veneer about him. Right? He calls the shots. He is the man who is supposed to be very upright. But he does the most terrible thing, asking Isabella to come to his bed in order to release her brother. So I have always said in class, let's say, that Angelo in Measure for Measure is a Malvolio figure in the play. Right? Is tragic Malvolio, and Malvolio is comic Angelo. Shakespeare always put these characters in such situations. You call them tragedy, comedy, that's our concern. So dost thou think because thou art virtuous, there shall be no more cakes and ale? Act 2, Scene 3, this question is vital to celebrate the spirit of the Carnivalisque. And Carnivalisque in literature subverts and liberates the assumptions of the dominant style. Now we had done that in Henry IV, which is both history and comedy. Twelfth Night almost is a sad play. Viola's plight is a very sad plight, but he will infuse this comic element towards the end. He played with the genres. Right? Shakespeare played with the genres. In Tamil literature, we use the word Thinai Mayakam. In Thinai poetry, we talk about Thinai Mayakam. Shakespeare was an adept in playing with genres. So you see in Twelfth Night, there is revelry under the aegis of Toby Belch, disguise, which is very important in Christmas celebrations, songs of feste, and the final epiphany, which happens when Sebastian comes and things like that. And what does the carnival spirit do? You have a familiar and free interactions between people. The fool in itself is a carnivalist figure because he can take on any king, any queen. You see, Feste can pull the Duke's leg, Duke Orsino's leg. He can pull Olivia's leg and get away with it. Right? Barriers between people, hierarchical barriers between people are broken down. Eccentric behavior is allowed. And most important is you sanction sacrilege in the carnival. Right? You sanction the sacrilege in the carnival. So what is the idea behind Twelfth Night? Why is it a sad play? Why is there a trace of sadness? The crucial idea in Twelfth Night is end of festivity. The return to normal life after the carnival. I always used to give this as an example, say in my classes. In those days, I don't know whether we have it today. On Teachers' Day, 5th of September, on Teachers' Day, we were given an opportunity to teach, and the teachers used to sit in our class. Some did it seriously, some did it the Falstaff way. Right? We have made teachers stand up on the bench. We have sent teachers out of class. We have even mildly beaten teachers with sticks. But you dare not think of doing any such thing on even the 6th of September. Carnival spirit has its own time and place. It has its own limitedness, as it were. Right? You need to return. Youth stuff will not endure. Feste says that. So the play, in spite of multiple marriages, 2 at least, right? Orsino gets married to Olivia. Olivia gets married to Sebastian, and Orsino gets married to Viola. Marriages take place, but 2 disgruntled elements, Antonio, the friend of Sebastian, who still has a problem with the Duke Orsino, and Malvolio is not reconciled. Malvolio is not reconciled. Like Iago, he is not reconciled till the end. You can't bring him back. Antonio in Tempest is another figure. Right? Iago says, from this moment, I will not utter a single word. Antonio keeps quiet in Tempest. So you return back to a normal life when evil is intact. Evil has not been conquered. Evil has not even been subdued in that particular context. Then we come to this alternative title, very postmodern, or What You Will. Now this shows the self-determination of characters to choose identities as they want. Viola decides to be Cesario. Malvolio wishes to be the Count. Olivia wants to be a grief-stricken cloistress, veiled cloistress. Right? Maria wants to marry Sir Toby Belch. So this is very important. And I would say that Maria's gulling of Malvolio is a play within the play, not in the traditional sense of the term, but it is an amazing play within a play. We can discuss that as instance of metadrama. But what is most important is, lot of these people suffer from excesses. Shakespeare believed in moderation. The Greek word eudaimonia, which means moderation. In Romeo and Juliet, he tells Romeo, the friar tells Romeo, love moderately. Right? We talk about balance. In Tamil, we call it aram. Aram is a terrific sense of balance. These in this play, right? So Toby excess, but it's comic. Duke Orsino is excess. Olivia is in excess. So all of them suffer from what is called excessive passion, and their illusions can be punctured only through art. Twelfth Night is a celebration of art. Right, now go back to, say, Harold Bloom's famous line, naturalistic unreality. It is the power of art that gets celebrated in Twelfth Night through Feste's gulling of Malvolio, and the final epiphany of Olivia finding, say, the twin of Viola, Sebastian gets married to him. Right? And Duke Orsino, who has been in love with love, which is an excess in itself. Otherwise, how could he switch partners so quickly? So all these grand illusions that you suffer from, these are instances of self-deception. Right? These are instances of self-deception. So they have been wearing masks, and it is only through masks do the other masks fall. That's the power of art. Right? That is the power of art. And among all the optical illusions of our consciousness, self-deception is the worst. And self-deception affects almost all the characters in the play Twelfth Night, excepting, say, Feste. Right? Excepting Feste. Now, I just spent 5 more minutes on Antony and Cleopatra just to talk about the symbolic significance of the title and the play. Now, it was obviously entered into the Stationers' Register in 1608. Probably completed, the play was completed in 1606, much after all the tragedies that he wrote. But it is believed to have been written during the time he was also writing Macbeth. Right? Lot of sources, Virgil, Horace, Chaucer's Legend of Good Women. That was one of the sources for Shakespeare for his character of Cleopatra. The Countess of Pembroke wrote a play called Antonius. It was a tragedy in 1592. Shakespeare must have read that. Samuel Daniel wrote in 1594 a play called Cleopatra that could have influenced him. Then he read Plutarch, obviously, through Thomas North's translation. Right? The life of Marcus Antonius in Plutarch's Life of Noble Grecians and Romans. Now, why did I use the term symbolic geography, which I will just talk about? There are 2 poles again. One is Egypt, the other is Rome. Right? You have powerful stances competing with each other. One is ethical, the other is emotional. Now it is this time that we need to refer to Sayyid Orientalism. When you can construct a country, you can construct a region, you can construct a continent. If you are in power, your constructions will hold. Right? What Sayyid says, unconscious positivity. That unconscious positivity. Right? You have no hesitation in constructing people. Cleopatra, in that sense, is much maligned. The triple pillar of the world has been transformed into a strumpet's fool, says Enobarbus, calling her a prostitute, a sex worker, to use a modern term. So, Rome is considered to be a world of measure, pragmatism, political ambition, which is required, whereas Egypt is always portrayed as a country of excess, passion, emotional desire. And very interestingly, in the play, Rome speaks about Rome, Rome speaks about Egypt. I'm not talking about characters, I'm speaking about nations speaking through characters. When Rome speaks about itself, it says we are a very disciplined, high-minded people. And when they speak about Egypt, they say it's self-indulgent, irresponsible culture. Egypt considers it to be generous, life affirming, most importantly. Emma Smith says that. And Egypt on Rome says it is cold and inhuman. So Antony and Cleopatra must be seen in the context of the fact that there are two nations in conflict. Political conflict is there, right? Antonio obviously has fallen in love with Cleopatra. But when Fulvia dies and when, say, there is a conflict between Octavius Caesar and Pompey, he returns to Rome, gets married to Octavia, forges an alliance with Octavius. And then when Octavius breaches the contract, he once again runs to the arms of Cleopatra. Right? So the play, very interestingly, provides us with multiple perspectives. For me, Antony and Cleopatra, with this gross violation of the unity of action and place and time. So many stories, so many subplots, so many scenes, 13 scenes, 14 scenes in one act. It provides you with what is called heteroglossia, multiple viewpoints, right? So many ways in which you can simulate a reality and make it pass off as truth, right? Antonio, very interestingly, Antony in Julius Caesar is the man who can change history. Friends, Romans, countrymen, that speech in Julius Caesar transforms history. Whereas in this play, he is a victim of history. Right? Antony is a victim of history. But what he wanted to do, as I told you, is to prove that love overcomes death. That will connect this will connect to sonnet number 116. It will carry it to the edge of doom. Right? When love matures, right? Kanasan says, Muzhumai petra kadal ellam mudumai varai odivar. Age is no factor at all. Love is not time's fool, he says in that sonnet. Not lust. Enabarbus and other Romans see it as lust. The expense of spirit and a waste of shame is lust in action. That's all. Look at the relationship between Antony and Cleopatra. Right? So in that sense, you can see Enabarbus as a choric commentator. But the most famous line, like Falstaff, the most misunderstood woman is Cleopatra. But Shakespeare had that courage to say, age cannot wither, nor custom stale her infinite variety. Right? Bloom has written a book on Cleopatra. You see that so much is there. And even Octavius Caesar, towards the end, he actually wanted to insult her, drag her to Rome in a caged, cart. But she obviously commits suicide. Antony commits suicide. Right? No grave upon the earth shall clip in it a pair so famous. He wishes that they be buried together. And this play is, again, a conflict between the public individuals, Antony and Cleopatra, but the greatness of their private selves. Right? The greatness of their private selves. I'll stop with this remark. Antony dies in the fourth act of the play. Antony and Cleopatra is a tragedy, like Romeo and Juliet. One does not know that the other is living. That's the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. Right? Antony doesn't know that Cleopatra is living. So he asks Eros, very interestingly. Eros is the god of love. Erotic comes from Eros. He asks that servant to kill him, but he commits suicide. He says, I dare not kill you, Antony. So he commits suicide in the fourth act of the play. Fifth act is devoted to Cleopatra. Right? If at all you say that this is a tragedy, you have a tragic heroine for the first time. Cleopatra is the first tragic heroine and the only tragic heroine in William Shakespeare. The whole female world, say, blossoms in the fifth act of the play. Right? Complete, say, power given to Cleopatra. She's like Macbeth. She's like Hamlet. She's like Lear. She's like Othello. Right? Consummating in wisdom when you come to the fifth act of the play. That is normally the space for a tragic hero. Right? That's the space for a tragic hero. And ironically, in Act 1, Scene 2, Antony says, "These strong Egyptian fetters I must break or lose myself in dotage." Right? Great instance of dramatic irony. These strong Egyptian fetters I must break. Act 1. Till the end, he could not break it. He loses himself in dotage. Right? He loses himself in dotage to, say, Cleopatra. Right? The Choric commentator later on understands the power and genius of Cleopatra. Right? This is the power that you have. And I will end with this brilliant comment by Marlin French, right? In which it said, at the end of Antony and Cleopatra, Caesar has the world. You know, that statement is made, let Rome in Tiber melt. Octavius Caesar will not allow that to happen. He is the first true emperor of Rome. Octavius Caesar is the first true emperor of Rome. No triumvirate. Right? No triumvirate. Right? So at the end of Antony and Cleopatra, Caesar has the world. Then comes a beautiful comment, but Antony and Cleopatra had the living. Right? Antony and Cleopatra had the living. And I like that amazing line in T.S. Eliot's Choruses from the Rock. Where is the life we have lost in living? Right? Where is the life we have lost in living? And in that context, one should say, Antony and Cleopatra, in spite of all their political debacles, right, the ignominy that they suffer from because of all the things that happen in the political world, in the geopolitical world of Rome and Egypt, they have never lost their living, primarily because love becomes the panacea of all the problems that they face on the political world. So their private world is intact. Right? Their private world has been intact. Husband, I come, she says, in the 5th act of the play. And this man says, I will follow you, Cleopatra. And he commits suicide. And I will seek my pardon with you for getting angry with you, for being upset with you. Husband, I come. Beautiful line. Right? It is that spirit of love. Right? The spirit of love, which in the Indian context we'll call Suddha Shringara. Pure love, pure love. Not love in union, not in love in separation, but love in pure union that can happen in spite of the physical that you see in sonnet number 116. Love is not time's fool. Right? Love is not time's fool. We can transcend time. We can carry it to the edge of doom, as he says, whereas lust is perjured, savage, cruel, and all that the world well knows, yet none knows well how to shun this heaven which leads men to hell. Beautiful conclusion to sonnet number 129. So when you take sonnet 116 and sonnet 129, you can apply it to Antony and Cleopatra. And with regard to the private selves of Antony and Cleopatra, you can say sonnet number 116 holds. But when you look at the constructs of Egypt by Rome, by Anabarbus, by others, then they will call it lust. And this man has lost his spirit, his spiritual vitality. The expense of spirit in a waste of shame is lust in action. Right? So those two sonnets can be interwoven. It can be interwoven into this text. And see Antony and Cleopatra's their love as a transcending, a time transcending, space transcending love. Suicide fun. Suicide fine. And I would like to conclude with that amazing line, though used negatively in Hamlet, for Antony and Cleopatra, death is a consummation devoutly to be wished. Right? That's how you look at the deaths of these two people, these amazing characters, right? Who come from history, but they are completely, say, different from what they have been in history because of Shakespeare's managing history most creatively. Right? Thank you very much. If you have any doubts, you can ask me now. If they have time, Dr. Chitra. One or two queries or something like that. Or we can do it in the second part. If you can always have that latitude.
Yes, students, you can ask your queries or doubts.
Sir, good evening, sir.
Yeah, yes, ma. Tell me, Anjum. Yeah.
Uh, yes, sir. So, with you see the writers of today, do you feel that anybody are working on the influence of the contribution of Shakespeare, sir?
I didn't get you. Sorry, I didn't get your question, ma. So,
Uh, so, we have many authors today. Do anybody use incorporate style of Shakespeare's writing in their works?
no, it's good question, very good question, because we discuss a lot of intertextuality today, right? Again, I'll have to go back to Bloom. He said Shakespeare is unimitated and inimitable. I don't think anybody had attempted to imitate William Shakespeare, right? Marlowe, Shakespeare imitated, right? Marlowe, Shakespeare imitated, but Shakespeare never was imitated, primarily because of his range and extent of the works that he did. But most importantly, G.B. Shaw, very interestingly, right, when he wrote his plays, he advertised saying that he has bettered Shakespeare. But that was only a business strategy, because he wanted a lot of people to come and see how good his play was. Was it better than Shakespeare by any chance? He knew that he could not better Shakespeare. But I don't think anybody had taken the style of Shakespeare. And what is even more interesting is, when you come to the later plays of Shakespeare, it is he who imitated John Donne. We have very clear instance of he getting inspired by or influenced by the style of early John Donne, is metaphysical kind of writing. But Taiba, Anjum, I don't think anybody has imitated his style at all. I don't think anybody has done that. If they do that, maybe you can do that as more as a literary exercise. But that in depth of analysis, the depth of understanding, and you see that the style is the man, and the style is the character actually. So you need such powerful characters to even speak that language. Right? You need such powerful characters to speak that language. And today it would be impossible, let's say, to talk about it. But what is very interesting is that the Elizabethans understood his language. Now we need an annotated text today. But many jokes were understood, let's say, even to what is called the groundlings. Hierarchically, they are supposed to be the worst among the Elizabethan members of the audience, but even they got the jokes. They responded to his poetry. But I don't think anybody has attempted to imitate his style. Right? You may say that he's out of fashion now. In that sense, he is out of fashion. Nobody could write like him. Nobody could write like him.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, ma. Thank you for the question.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, Ms. Pavitra, tell me.
As you compared Sonnet 116 with Antonio Cleopatra, we can also compare Sonnet 129 with Antonio Cleopatra, sir. Can you justify, sir? How come?
If you take the characters of Antony and Cleopatra, Sonnet 116 suits them. Right? Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. In the fifth act of the play, you definitely see a marriage of true minds. And today, you read Antony and Cleopatra, you read Romeo and Juliet, because they have become prototypical lovers. Right? As he says in that sonnet, love is an ever-fixed mark. It's a star to every wandering bark, like you see in John Donne's poems. Right? Like you see in John Donne's poems. Imitate us and lead a life of love. So, if you take the private selves of Antony and Cleopatra, you can adapt that sonnet and see the love between Antony and Cleopatra as a marriage of true minds. as definitely a marriage of true minds, where they have transcended time and space. He says, let Rome in Tiber melt. See, he doesn't care for Egypt, the physical space, right? The physical space. So in that context, I would say that when you take the private world of Antony and Cleopatra, sonnet number 116 fits them. But when you look at the way in which Cleopatra has been seen, even by Antony sometimes in a moment of anger, in a fit of anger, they have always constructed, or they have always seen this relationship as a sexual one rather than that which is born out of love. Right? That's why I quoted that line. He says it is a fetter, it's an imprisonment. I need to come out of this dotage, he says. So he considers it to be a lust. Even he at the beginning. But Enobarbus, Octavius Caesar, all the Romans who are so upset with Antony will only see this as the gypsy's lust. Right? The gypsy's lust. In that particular context. Right? So the expression strumpet's fool goes with the line, because there was a dark lady. You know that sonnets are addressed to two people. Sonnets 1 to 126 are addressed to a young man friend who is the Earl of Southampton. And then the rival poet is there, Marlowe, 85 and 86, we refer to those sonnets. And then you have the dark lady who was Mary Fulton, F-U-T-T-O-N, or Mary Fulton, two names are given, who was a woman of ill repute during Shakespeare's time. She had an affair with, most of the big people during that time. She even seduced the Earl of Southampton. You have stories of that kind. So she represents lust. That is why I told you 129, from Roman point of view, the relationship between Antony and Cleopatra is seen as sheer lust, nothing beyond that, nothing beyond the physical. But for Antony and Cleopatra, it is definitely metaphysical. It is transcendental. That is, in that context, I refer to these two sonnets.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Pavitra.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah,
Dear
thank you,
participants.
Pavitra, and thank you, Dr. Chitra and Dr. Srilata, for this
Thank
wonderful
you, thank
opportunity. I
you
should
so
thank
much,
all the
sir.
students.
We enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah, pleasure, always a pleasure. I thank all the students of 3rd BA and 1st MA. And I wish the 1st MAs all the best, because I think they are taking their examination soon on Shakespeare. Right? And I think I will meet 3rd BAs and 1st MAs when I think they'll be 2nd MAs by the time I meet them for the second part of the lecture. Right? So God bless you all. And again, thanks for this wonderful opportunity. Right?
Taiba?
And thanks, Abita, for coordinating the whole program.
Thank you, sir. Taiba, you can take over.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your enthusiastic and engaging and a very interesting session, sir. We will definitely incorporate whatever you have said in our study and our research further. We are grateful to you, sir. Thank you. I would request our faculty, Dr. Srilata ma'am, to kindly propose the vote of time.
Srimam, we are not able to listen to you. I think you have to unmute yourself. Ma'am, you have to unmute yourself.
Srilata, you have to switch on your mic.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Taiba. Now, good evening to all. Thank you, sir, for the comprehensive talk on understanding Shakespeare by circulating the social energy into this virtual environment, stirring into the true history of the times of Shakespeare. Thank you very much, sir, for taking us on a tour in a journey into the Elizabethan world of drama with a shower of the critics and their school of criticism centered upon the only god or the bard of Avon, William Shakespeare. Now, we could feel the voices in history. We could see from your speech with the dead, which an amalgamation of the voices, and in your reference to the new historicism or the return to history, we understand that history cannot be severed from any creativity, as Stephen Greenblatt has said, bringing back to life the soul that is locked in the pages of the immortal text. We are truly grateful to you, sir, by catapulting the thinking and admiration to the dramatist genius, which cannot be certainly contained in mere words. Actually, the life that is packed in these plays is a boon to the lovers of history of man and the psyche of human being that varies to create a shudder impression, leaving us with an unquenching thirst to read and visualize and re-visualize the stage as you like it or what you will. Now, Shakespeare is definitely adept at playing with the genres, as you said. We do understand you. Now, as in the final things, when you spoke about moderation, which Shakespeare has used as the key word, that definitely echoes in all his plays. You also touched upon Richard II, Antony and Cleopatra, and it's like revisiting the whole syllabus that we have framed for the first 10 girls. I think they surely will be very happy. And thank you very much, sir, for this enlightened
pleasure. Thank
talk.
you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good day to you. Good day to you. And thanks, Dr.
Thank
Chitra.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, I'll meet you for the second part. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
God bless
Thank you all. Before we close,
Thank you,
a very
Abhita.
special
Thank you,
thank you, sir. A very special word of thanks to Dr. Lavanya for live streaming the event. And ma'am recorded the whole session. I think it's going to benefit generations of students. So thank you so much. And a very special word of thanks to Chitra ma'am, Shri ma'am. I had the honor of sharing the paper with her and a very vibrant set of students. I think that was the prime motivation behind organizing the talk. You made such a great class, and we thought you should get this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye, all of you. Yeah.